Deep beneath the imperial palace on Terra, in a chamber carved from what was once Mount Everest, sits the most horrifying testament to humanity's desperation. The Emperor of Mankind, once the architect of humanity's greatest empire, now exists as little more than a withered corpse trapped within the Golden Throne, a baroque amalgamation of ancient technology and life support systems that predates even his reign. This is not the dignified rest of a fallen hero, nor the peaceful slumber of a sleeping god. This is torment stretched across 10,000 years, sustained by a machinery that grows more unreliable with each passing cycle, powered by a sacrifice so vast and relentless that it defies comprehension. The Golden Throne itself stands as a monument to lost knowledge and failing hope. Discovered by the Emperor during the Unification Wars, buried in sunken ruins beneath the Asian deserts, the device originated from humanity's dark age of technology, an era when mankind's scientific achievements reached heights that would seem like sorcery to the tech priests who now tend to its deteriorating mechanisms. The throne was never designed as a life support system. Its original purpose was far grander, serving as a psychic amplifier and portal into the Aeldari webway, that labyrinthine network of tunnels through space that would have freed humanity from its dangerous dependence on warp travel. The Emperor had envisioned a future where mankind could traverse the galaxy instantaneously, protected from the predations of chaos, united across impossible distances in a true empire of enlightenment. That dream died screaming when Magnus the Red, attempting to warn his father of Horus's betrayal, shattered the psychic wards protecting the human-built portion of the webway. Demons poured through the breach by the thousands, slaughtering the Mechanicum workers and forcing a desperate defensive war in the tunnels beneath the palace. The Emperor himself was forced to sit upon the Golden Throne, using his immense psychic power to hold back the tide of chaos that threatened to consume Terra itself. For 5 years, he sat there while his dream burned around him, watching as his grand design collapsed into ruin. By the time the war within the webway ended and the Imperial forces retreated, sealing the portal, the Emperor had become a prisoner of his own device. Only his psychic might could keep the portal closed. Only his presence on the throne prevented Terra from being consumed by the horrors of the warp. Then came the confrontation aboard the Vengeful Spirit. When the Emperor finally left the throne to face Horus, Malkador the Sigillite took his place, a sacrifice that would consume the ancient Psyker's life in mere hours. The Emperor returned victorious but mortally wounded, his body shattered by his traitorous son, sustained only by the fading power of his perpetual nature. Rogul Dawn ordered emergency modifications to the Golden Throne, transforming it from a portal device into a life support system, lashing together technology and desperation in equal measure. The Emperor was interred within, his broken body connected to the device through massive cables and conduits, his consciousness spread between the material world and the warp, fighting battles that would never end. The daily mechanics of this sustained existence reveal the true horror of the Imperial truth. Every day the black ships arrive at Terra, vessels painted in somber colours that cruise the galaxy harvesting those humans born with psychic abilities. These ships represent both salvation and damnation for the mutant. For while Psykers left untrained pose an existential threat to their worlds, becoming potential gateways for demonic incursion, those brought to Terra face a fate that makes quick death seem merciful. The vast majority are sorted according to their strength and stability. The strongest and most disciplined may be trained to serve the Imperium as astropaths, soul-bound to the Emperor in a ceremony that blinds them but grants them the ability to send messages across the void. Others might join the Astra Militarum as sanctioned Psykers, or serve the Inquisition, or fill other specialized roles where their abilities prove useful. But for every Psyker granted such purpose, dozens more fail to meet the standards required for training. Too weak to be useful, yet too dangerous to be released, these unfortunates face the throne's hunger. 1,000 souls each day, according to the ancient calculations, though some records suggest that number has increased dramatically over the millennia. By late M36, the Golden Throne began requiring greater and greater sacrifices to maintain optimal function. By early M41, 4 times as many Psykers were being fed to the device as in the years immediately following the Emperor's ascension. The exact number matters less than the reality of what it represents. An industrial-scale consumption of human life, processed with bureaucratic efficiency by an Imperium that has long since ceased to question whether there might be another way. The process itself remains shrouded in the secrecy that surrounds all functions of the imperial palace's deepest sanctums. The psychers destined for the throne are led through the labyrinthine passages of the palace, past layer after layer of security and ritual, until they reach the Sanctum Imperialis. What happens in those final moments exists beyond the knowledge of all but a select few. The Adeptus Custodes who stand eternal vigil, and the highest-ranking tech priests of the Mechanicus who maintain the throne's functions. The psychers do not return. Their life essence, their very souls, are drawn into the Emperor's being, their psychic energy consumed to fuel his continued existence and to power the Astronomicon, that great psychic beacon which makes faster-than-light travel possible throughout the Imperium. Without this sacrifice, the Emperor would fade. Without the Emperor, the Astronomicon would go dark. Without the Astronomicon, every Imperial vessel travelling through the warp would be lost, blind in an ocean of madness and predatory entities. The entire infrastructure of the Imperium depends on ships being able to navigate between systems, on goods and soldiers, and information flowing across the void. The Imperium is too vast for any other form of communication or control. Remove the Astronomicon, and the Empire would fragment instantly into millions of isolated worlds, each left to face the galaxy's horrors alone. This is the justification offered for the daily harvest of souls, the cold calculation that makes the sacrifice not just acceptable, but necessary. Yet even this terrible mathematics grows more desperate with each passing year. The Golden Throne is failing. The tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, those who have spent lifetimes studying its mechanisms, have discovered failures in systems they lack the knowledge to repair. The device dates from the dark age of technology, constructed using principles and materials that humanity's current civilization cannot replicate. Worse, the Emperor's modifications during the heresy were performed in haste, under siege conditions without proper documentation or planning. The result is a hybrid system, part ancient wonder and part desperate improvisation. Held together by prayers to the machine god and increasingly frequent jury-rigged patches that buy mere decades against the inexorable march of entropy. In the closing years of M41, shortly before the formation of the Great Rift, this crisis came to a head. Facing the imminent failure of the throne, several high-ranking members of the Imperium made a decision that would have been unthinkable in any other age. The Fabricator General himself, along with the Master of the Astronomicon and the Speaker for the Chartist Captains, conspired to smuggle a Dark Eldar homunculus onto Terra. These masters of fleshcraft, twisted practitioners of torture and body modification, were thought to possess knowledge that might repair the throne's failing mechanisms. The desperation required to make such a bargain, to invite one of the Emperor's ancient enemies into the heart of the Imperial Palace, speaks to the depths of the crisis facing humanity. The scheme failed catastrophically. The homunculus betrayed the conspirators, disappearing into the depths beneath the palace where it conducted grotesque experiments and killings before finally being hunted down. The throne remained unrepaired, its mechanisms continuing their slow decay. The incident was suppressed, hidden from the vast majority of the Imperium's citizens who remain ignorant of how close their entire civilization came to collapse. The official histories make no mention of Xenos entering the Sanctum Imperialis, of desperate bargains struck in the shadows. The Imperium's propaganda machine grinds on, proclaiming the Emperor's eternal vigilance while those who know the truth scramble to find solutions that do not exist. The Emperor's conscious experience of all this remains perhaps the greatest mystery and the greatest horror. His body has long since ceased to resemble anything living. The flesh that remains is desiccated, sustained only by the throne's mechanisms and the force of his will. Yet his mind endures, spread across both the material realm and the immaterium, simultaneously guiding the Astronomicon, battling demonic incursions in the warp, speaking through the Emperor's tarot to those who possess the ability to interpret its prophetic images, and soul-binding psychers to serve the Imperium. Some accounts suggest he remains aware enough to hold audiences with his most important servants, that when Robert Guilliman, returned from his own centuries of stasis, finally gained access to the throne room, some communication occurred between father and son. What that communication revealed has never been disclosed. Guilliman emerged changed, his faith in the Imperial Creed shaken, his certainty about his father's divinity replaced by something darker and more complex. Whatever truths the Emperor imparted, they were not the reassurances the Primarch might have hoped for. The being on the Golden Throne if it can still be called a being, exists in a state that defies mortal comprehension. Is the Emperor still the man who united Terra during the Age of Strife, who forged the Space Marine legions and launched the Great Crusade, or has 10,000 years of psychic strain and constant battle against chaos transformed him into something else entirely? Something as alien to his original nature as the gods he spent his existence opposing? The Imperial cult, which has grown to dominate the spiritual life of the Imperium despite the Emperor's own adamant rejection of divinity, preaches that the God Emperor watches over all humanity, that his consciousness extends throughout his empire, offering protection to the faithful and guidance to the lost. Miracles are attributed to his intervention. Saints claim to act with his blessing. The living saints themselves, those rare individuals who manifest supernatural powers in the Emperor's name, are held up as proof of his continued active involvement in the material world. Whether any of this represents the Emperor's actual will, or whether it emerges from humanity's collective belief in him, creating a warp entity formed from faith and desperation, remains a question that only heretics dare ask aloud. The ecclesiarchy, the vast religious bureaucracy that has made worship of the Emperor into the Imperium's state religion, brooks no questioning of established doctrine. To suggest that the Emperor might not be the omniscient, omnipotent deity depicted in countless works of devotional art is to invite investigation by the Inquisition. To propose that his suffering on the Golden Throne might be unjust, that there might be alternatives to the daily sacrifice of psykers, is to commit heresy of the highest order. The Imperium cannot afford doubt. Its entire structure, both political and spiritual, rests on the foundation of the Emperor's divinity and the necessity of his continued existence. To question that foundation is to threaten everything. Yet some do question, in whispers and shadows, in the privacy of their own thoughts, or in the company of trusted fellow heretics. They ask whether a different choice might have been made in those desperate hours after the Emperor's fall, whether perhaps it would have been kinder to let him die, to allow his perpetual nature to attempt its resurrection, or to let his consciousness finally rest. They wonder if 10,000 years of agony, of being simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, of fighting endless battles in the warp while your body decays to dust, represents a fate worse than death. They speculate about what the Emperor himself would choose, if choice were offered, whether the architect of the imperial truth would approve of what his Imperium has become in his name. These questions have no answers, or rather they have only the answer provided by 10 millennia of precedent and the cold reality of the Imperium's dependence on its dying god. The sacrifice continues because it must continue. The psykers flow to Terra in an endless river of souls because to stop would mean the end of everything humanity has built. The tech priests work frantically to delay the inevitable failure of the Golden Throne because failure is unthinkable. And the Emperor endures, trapped in his prison of gold and ancient technology, his suffering prolonged indefinitely by the very civilization he created to protect and guide humanity into a better future. The irony would be devastating if anyone dared acknowledge it. The Emperor, who rejected religion and superstition, has become the central figure of the galaxy's largest faith. The man who sought to elevate humanity through science and reason has been transformed into a supernatural icon, his image adorning countless churches, his name invoked in prayers and battle cries. The being who wanted to free humanity from the predations of the warp now exists partially within it. His consciousness spread through the immaterium, fighting the very entities he spent his mortal life opposing. Every aspect of his current existence represents a perversion of his original goals, and yet without this perversion, without his continued imprisonment on the throne, the species he sacrificed everything to protect would face extinction within weeks. The Emperor's legions, the Space Marines who once served as the instruments of his will, have become divided in their understanding of their father. Some chapters maintain the Emperor's old secular philosophy as much as the current Imperium permits, viewing him as the greatest of men rather than as a deity. Others have embraced the imperial cult fully, worshipping the Emperor as the one true god and seeing themselves as his divine instruments. Still others exist in uncomfortable middle ground, acknowledging the Emperor's extraordinary nature while rejecting the more extreme claims of the ecclesiarchy. None can deny, however, that the being on the Golden Throne, whether god or man or something in between, represents everything their purpose is built upon. The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guard, maintain their vigil as they have for 10,000 years. Unlike the Space Marines, they never left Terra, never spread across the galaxy pursuing the Great Crusade's goals. They remained in the palace, standing guard over their fallen master, watching as his body slowly deteriorated within the Golden Throne, bearing witness to the daily procession of psychers being fed to the device. Of all the Emperor's servants, they know best the reality of his condition. They have seen the tech priest's increasingly desperate attempts at maintenance. They understand, perhaps better than anyone, how close the Imperium stands to the precipice of total collapse. Yet they say nothing, reveal nothing, maintain their perfect discipline and their perfect silence. The secrets of the Sanctum Imperialis remain inviolate. The broader population of the Imperium remains largely ignorant of the specifics of the Emperor's condition. They know he sits upon the Golden Throne, that he guides the Astronomicon, that he watches over humanity and protects them from the darkness. The exact nature of his existence, the details of the daily sacrifice required to maintain him, the failing mechanisms and desperate repairs, all of this remains hidden behind layers of security and bureaucratic obscurity. The average Imperial citizen, toiling in a hive city factory or farming an agri-world, knows only that the Emperor protects, that faith in him is mandatory, and that to question his divinity is to invite the most severe punishment imaginable. This deliberate ignorance serves a purpose. The Imperium has learned, across 10,000 years of warfare and crisis, that hope is as necessary as ammunition. The citizenry must believe that the Emperor watches over them, that their suffering serves a greater purpose, that ultimate victory over the galaxy's countless threats remains possible. To reveal the full truth of the Golden Throne, to acknowledge that the foundation of the entire imperial edifice rests upon a failing machine and a slowly dying corpse, would risk the kind of mass panic and despair that could tear the Imperium apart from within. Better to maintain the illusion, to preserve the faith, to ensure that when the Guard regiments march into battle, or the Navy's warships enter the warp, they do so believing that the God Emperor truly does protect. The practical implications of the Emperor's imprisonment extend far beyond the merely symbolic or spiritual. His presence on the Golden Throne serves multiple critical functions simultaneously, each one essential to the Imperium's continued existence. The Astronomicon, powered by his psychic might, and the souls of the sacrificed psychers, projects its beacon across vast distances, allowing navigators to guide ships through the warp with some degree of safety and accuracy. Without this beacon, warp travel would become impossibly dangerous, even more so than it already is. Ships would be lost in the immaterium, their crews consumed by demons or driven mad by exposure to the warp's chaotic energies. The Imperium's ability to maintain its territorial integrity depends absolutely on the Astronomicon's continued function. Beyond this navigational function, the Emperor's consciousness in the warp serves as a bulwark against demonic incursion. His presence acts as a ward, a barrier of psychic force that helps prevent the full might of chaos from manifesting on Terra or overwhelming the Imperium's defences. During particularly severe warp storms, or when the forces of the ruinous powers make concerted efforts to breach reality, the Emperor's intervention has reportedly prevented catastrophes that would have consumed entire sectors. Whether this protection extends throughout the Imperium or remains focused primarily on Terra itself is debated, but the consensus among those with the knowledge to understand such matters is that the Emperor's presence in the warp provides humanity with a defensive capability that cannot be replicated through any other means. The circumstances that led to the Emperor's imprisonment on the Golden Throne carry their own terrible weight. The final confrontation between the Emperor and Horus Lupercal, once the greatest of the Primarchs and the Emperor's most beloved son, stands as one of the most catastrophic single events in human history. During the Siege of Terra, with the Imperial Palace's defences crumbling and Loyalist reinforcements mere days away, Horus made a calculated gamble. He lowered the void shields of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, a gesture that could be interpreted either as a moment of doubt and regret or as a final challenge to his father. Whatever Horus's true motivation, the Emperor accepted the invitation, teleporting aboard the massive battle barge alongside Rogel Dawn, Sanguinius, several companies of veteran space marines, and his Adeptus Custodes Guard. Horus, empowered by all four Chaos gods and augmented by knowledge stolen from the warp itself during his pilgrimage to Moloch, had become something far beyond a mere Primarch. The blessings of the ruinous powers had elevated him to a state approaching godhood, his physical form swollen with demonic energies, his mind expanded to encompass vast tracts of forbidden knowledge. When Sanguinius reached him first, the Angel of Baal fought with all the desperate fury of one who knew his own death approached. Sanguinius had foreseen this moment, had known that he would die here, and he used that knowledge to strike at Horus with supernatural skill and determination. He even managed to wound the War Master, leaving a chink in his armour that would prove crucial in the battle to come. But Sanguinius was exhausted from the siege, wounded from countless battles and facing an opponent who had transcended the limitations of mortal flesh. Horus had initially restrained his full power, hoping to corrupt his brother rather than destroy him, but time pressure forced his hand. When he sensed the Emperor approaching, Horus unleashed the totality of his chaos-enhanced might. He reached into the 8th dimension, grasping Sanguinius mid-flight and slamming the Primarch to the deck with such force that his spine shattered. The death of the angel was neither quick nor merciful, a demonstration of the depths to which Horus had fallen, and a message to the Emperor about what awaited him. The Emperor arrived to find his most artistic son dead at the feet of his most favoured. What transpired in the moments that followed has been debated for 10,000 years, coloured by propaganda, religious fervour, and the simple impossibility of truly understanding beings of such power engaged in combat. The standard narrative promoted by the ecclesiarchy and accepted by most imperial citizens holds that the Emperor initially held back out of love for Horus, unable to fully commit to destroying his wayward son. This hesitation allowed Horus to inflict terrible wounds, burning the Emperor's face, bursting one of his eyes, tearing his arm from its socket, and finally breaking his spine across the War Master's knee. This explanation has always been suspect to those who understand the Emperor's true nature. The Master of Mankind, for all his grandeur and power, had never been known for sentimentality. His relationship with the Primarchs was functional rather than genuinely paternal. He had allowed them to call him father as a useful fiction, a means of securing their loyalty and creating proper command structures, but his actual feelings toward them appeared far more pragmatic. The Emperor viewed the Primarchs as tools, magnificent ones certainly, but ultimately as instruments to be used in his grand design for humanity's future. The notion that such a being would allow himself to be nearly destroyed out of fatherly love strains credibility. Alternative explanations exist, though they are rarely voiced openly. Some suggest that the wound inflicted by the demon Drachnian, which the Emperor had sealed into the body of a custodian and sent running into the depths of the webway, had weakened him more than was generally acknowledged. Others propose that Horus, despite his arrogance, had prepared carefully for this confrontation, perhaps employing some form of warpcraft or ritual to weaken the Emperor before their physical meeting. The Emperor had been sitting on the Golden Throne for 5 years prior to this battle, maintaining the psychic wards that kept demons from flooding through Magnus's breach into the webway. That constant strain, combined with simultaneously powering the Astronomicon and fighting a psychic war in the Immaterium, may have left him more vulnerable than anyone realised. There is also the possibility, uncomfortable as it may be to contemplate, that Horus simply proved more powerful than expected. The Chaos Gods had poured enormous resources into creating their champion, gambling everything on this single confrontation. The power flowing through Horus during that battle may have genuinely rivaled or exceeded the Emperor's own, at least temporarily. The Emperor's prescient abilities, his capacity to see multiple possible futures, may have shown him outcomes where he could salvage something from the catastrophe, where he might redeem Horus or at least recover some portion of his plans for humanity. A pragmatist to his core, the Emperor would have pursued even the slimmest hope of a better outcome rather than immediately resorting to absolute force. The battle's conclusion came only after a crucial moment of clarity. Different accounts provide different details, but the core remains consistent. Something broke through the Emperor's restraint or uncertainty. Some versions claim it was the sight of a lone guardsman or terminator who died trying to defend him, demonstrating a courage that contrasted starkly with Horus's corruption. Others suggest the Emperor finally accepted that nothing of his son remained within the chaos-twisted shell before him. Whatever the trigger, the Emperor unleashed the full measure of his psychic might. He struck not just at Horus's body, but at his very soul, burning away the corruption, obliterating the blessings of the Chaos Gods, and finally erasing the War Master's essence from existence with such thoroughness that even the ruinous powers could not preserve it. But the victory came at a cost that would echo through the next 10 millennia. The Emperor's body had been devastated beyond any hope of normal healing. His face was ruined, one eye destroyed, limbs torn away, spine shattered, internal organs ruptured. For any other being, even a Primarch, such injuries would have meant instant death. The Emperor's nature as a perpetual and immortal capable of resurrection should theoretically have allowed him to recover given time, but there would be no time. Malcador the Sigillite, the Emperor's oldest friend and closest advisor, had been sitting on the Golden Throne in the Emperor's absence, using his own considerable psychic power to maintain the wards against the Webway's demonic inhabitants. Malcador the Hero, as the Emperor would decree he should forever be known, had understood from the moment he took his place upon the throne that he was accepting a death sentence. Though a psyker of immense power, second only to the Emperor himself among living humans, Malcador's strength proved insufficient for the task demanded of him. The energies flowing through the Golden Throne, the constant pressure from the tides of chaos pushing against the sealed Webway portal, began consuming him immediately. His body started to deteriorate, flesh slowly burning away under the psychic strain. Yet he held on through sheer force of will, maintaining his vigil even as he felt his physical form turning to ash, his soul stretched to its absolute limits. When Rogel Dorn and Constantin Valdor brought the Emperor's broken body back to the throne room, they found Malcador barely clinging to existence. His body had largely dissolved, reduced to little more than dust held together by determination and loyalty. The ancient Sigillite was blind, mute, unable to communicate except through the most basic psychic impressions. Traitor forces had reached the outer doors of the throne room itself, and Vulcan had begun to activate the Talisman of 7 Hammers, a fail-safe device that would destroy not just the Imperial Palace, but all of Terra rather than allow it to fall to chaos. Malcador sensed this but could not speak, could not stop what was happening, trapped in a prison of his own failing flesh. The Emperor, even mortally wounded, perceived the situation instantly. The tech priests worked with desperate speed, preparing to transfer the Emperor to the throne while making emergency modifications to transform it from the psychic amplifier and Webway portal it had been into a life support system capable of sustaining the Emperor's shattered form. As they lifted Malcador from the device, his body crumbled completely to ash, the last of his physical integrity surrendered in that moment. But in the instant before death claimed him fully, Malcador performed one final act of service. He released the last fragments of his psychic strength, feeding them into the Emperor to provide a brief respite from the edge of death, giving his master just enough time to issue final commands before being sealed within the throne. The modifications to the Golden Throne were performed under the most adverse conditions imaginable. Rogel Dorn commanded the work while simultaneously organizing the defense of the throne room against the traitor forces hammering at its doors. The tech priests worked in a state of near panic, dealing with technology they only partially understood, trying to repurpose ancient mechanisms for a function they were never designed to perform. The result was a hybrid system, part Dark Age wonder and part desperate improvisation, a life support apparatus that would keep the Emperor's body intact while allowing his consciousness to extend into the warp and power the Astronomicon. The Emperor's last instructions, spoken through ruined lips as he was being connected to the throne's systems, would shape the Imperium for the next 10,000 years. He commanded that the Imperium continue, that humanity must endure regardless of cost. He appointed Malcador's chosen operatives as the founding members of the Inquisition, giving them authority to root out heresy and protect humanity from threats both internal and external. He blessed the founding of the Grey Knights, the demon hunting chamber militant that Malcador had prepared on Titan, hidden away in the warp throughout the heresy, and he accepted his fate, acknowledging that he would not walk among men again, that his work would continue from the prison of the Golden Throne for however long his will could sustain it. The psychological and spiritual implications of the Emperor's current state remained subjects of intense theological and philosophical debate within those rare circles permitted to engage in such discussions. The Imperial Creed teaches that the Emperor is omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent, the God Emperor whose consciousness extends throughout his domain, watching over all humanity. The older Imperial truth, which the Emperor himself had proclaimed during the Great Crusade, held that there were no gods, that the Emperor was simply the greatest exemplar of human potential elevated through knowledge and willpower. Both of these positions are demonstrably problematic when confronted with the reality of a decaying corpse trapped in a failing machine. The Emperor's own stated beliefs during his active life rejected divinity absolutely. He had sought to elevate humanity beyond superstition, to create a society governed by reason and science rather than faith and ritual. The irony of his current worship by trillions of faithful believers represents perhaps the greatest perversion of his original vision. Yet it is possible, even likely, that this worship serves a functional purpose beyond mere social control. The warp responds to belief, thought, and emotion. The concentrated faith of humanity, focused on the Emperor as a divine figure, may have created a presence in the Immaterium, a warp entity formed from collective devotion that acts according to humanity's desperate prayers. Whether this hypothetical warp entity bears any relationship to the actual consciousness of the man who once united Terra remains an open question. The Emperor's mind, spread between the material world and the Immaterium, battling demons and directing the Astronomicon, while simultaneously trying to guide humanity through the Emperor's tarot and other subtle interventions, may have fragmented or evolved into something that transcends its original human nature. Some scholars of the Forbidden suggest that what exists now is neither fully the Emperor as he was nor fully a warp god, but some hybrid state of being caught between mortality and divinity, between the material and the immaterial, conscious but transformed beyond recognition. The practical considerations of maintaining the Emperor's existence grow more dire with each passing century. The Golden Throne's mechanisms continue to fail in ways the tech priests cannot repair. The knowledge required to properly maintain Dark Age technology has been lost for millennia. The Adeptus Mechanicus operates according to ritual and superstition as much as genuine understanding, treating the machine spirits as literal entities to be placated rather than as anthropomorphized descriptions of technological systems. When a component of the throne fails, the tech priests may spend years searching their archives for the proper rituals and incantations to repair it, all while the device continues to deteriorate. The desperation of the situation became undeniable in the final years of M41. The tech priests discovered catastrophic failures in multiple critical systems, failures so severe that they exceeded the Mechanicus' ability to address them. Faced with the prospect of the Golden Throne's complete collapse within centuries or perhaps mere decades, several high-ranking Imperial officials made decisions that would have been unthinkable under any other circumstances. The Fabricator General himself, the highest authority within the Adeptus Mechanicus, entered into secret negotiations with the Dark Eldar, those twisted remnants of the Eldari who dwell in the nightmare city of Comera. The Dark Eldar Homunculi, masters of fleshcraft and biological manipulation, possess knowledge of techniques that seem like sorcery to lesser civilizations. Their ability to reshape living tissue, to sustain life in bodies that should have died millennia ago, suggested they might offer solutions to the Golden Throne's failing life support systems. The bargain struck gave the Dark Eldar access to billions of human slaves and, more significantly, allowed them technical access to study the Golden Throne itself. For the Mechanicus, this represented an unthinkable compromise, inviting ancient enemies into the most sacred site in the Imperium, but the alternative was worse. If the throne failed completely, the Astronomicon would die, the Emperor would perish, and the Imperium would collapse into isolated fragments within weeks. The scheme ended in betrayal, as dealings with the Dark Eldar invariably do. The homunculus assigned to the task disappeared into the depth beneath the Imperial Palace, conducting grotesque experiments and murders while the Mechanicus frantically tried to locate and eliminate the threat they had invited into Terra's heart. The incident was eventually resolved, the Xenos eliminated, but the throne remained unrepaired. The temporary fixes implemented by the Dark Eldar's work bought perhaps a few additional centuries, delaying rather than preventing the ultimate failure. The conspirators faced investigation by the Inquisition, though the full truth of their actions was suppressed to prevent panic throughout the Imperium. The formation of the Great Rift in the wake of the 13th Black Crusade brought new complications and, paradoxically, some unexpected relief. The massive warp storm that split the galaxy in half, cutting Terra off from vast swathes of Imperial territory, coincided with the return of Robert Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines. Guilliman had spent nearly 10,000 years in stasis, his body preserved by the Eldari after suffering a mortal wound. His resurrection and return to active service represented a dramatic shift in the Imperium's circumstances, providing genuine leadership for the first time since the Emperor's internment. Guilliman's audience with the Emperor, conducted in absolute privacy within the throne room with only the Adeptus Custodes as silent witnesses, resulted in some form of communication between father and son. What exactly transpired has never been revealed, but Guilliman emerged from the encounter visibly shaken, his faith in both the Emperor's divinity and the righteousness of the Imperium's current state severely compromised. The Primarch has never spoken openly about what he witnessed, or what communications occurred, but his subsequent actions suggest a man grappling with revelations that challenged everything he believed about his father and the empire built in his name. The ethical dimensions of the Emperor's imprisonment present questions that the Imperium's structure prevents from being seriously examined. Is the prolongation of his existence, at such tremendous cost in lives and resources, truly what the Emperor himself would choose if choice were offered? The being who rejected godhood and sought to elevate humanity through science and reason now exists as the focus of the galaxy's largest religion, worshipped by populations who have never known any other faith. The man who dreamed of freeing humanity from the warp's dangers has become a creature of both realms, his consciousness split between material and immaterial existence, fighting endless battles against the very forces he sought to protect mankind from. The daily sacrifice of psykers raises its own terrible questions. These are human beings, individuals with thoughts, dreams, fears, and the capacity to suffer. Many are children when they're taken by the black ships, torn from their families, transported across the galaxy to a fate they cannot comprehend. The majority never receive any training, never serve any purpose beyond fueling the Emperor's continued existence. They die by the thousands, their souls consumed, their potential unrealized, their lives ending in terror and pain. The Imperium justifies this as necessary, pointing to the countless trillions whose lives depend on the Astronomican's continued function. But the scale of the sacrifice is staggering. Over 10,000 years, hundreds of millions of psykers have been fed to the Golden Throne, an industrial-scale slaughter dressed up in religious ritual and bureaucratic necessity. The psykers themselves have no say in their fate. They are rounded up, sorted and disposed of according to the Imperium's needs without regard for their individual humanity. The strongest and most disciplined might be trained to serve, granted the privilege of being blinded and soul-bound rather than simply consumed. The rest face the throne's hunger, their lives measured in the contribution they can make to sustaining the Emperor rather than in their own inherent value as thinking, feeling beings. This system perpetuates itself through the same logic that justifies all of the Imperium's worst excesses. Survival requires sacrifice, the individual matters less than the species, necessity trumps morality. Yet what choice exists? The Imperium's dependence on the Astronomican is absolute. Without it, interstellar travel becomes impossibly dangerous. The Empire fragments immediately into isolated worlds, each unable to call for help, unable to receive supplies or reinforcements, left to face the galaxy's horrors alone. The Tau, the Orcs, the Tyranids, the forces of chaos, all would fall upon these isolated worlds like predators on wounded prey. Within a generation, perhaps less, the majority of human worlds would fall. The species might survive in scattered pockets, but the civilization, the accumulated knowledge and culture of 10,000 years would be lost. Set against this apocalyptic scenario, the sacrifice of 1,000 psykers daily seems, if not acceptable, at least comprehensible as the lesser evil. This calculus, this cold weighing of lives against civilizational survival, represents the fundamental character of the Imperium in the 41st millennium. Every decision is made in the shadow of extinction. Every policy is justified by the constant proximity of annihilation. The Imperium has become a machine for converting human lives into time, buying another day, another year, another century of survival through sacrifice measured in billions. The Emperor's imprisonment on the Golden Throne stands as the ultimate symbol of this exchange. The greatest hero of humanity reduced to a consuming void into which souls are fed without end, sustaining an existence that may be worse than death but must continue, because the alternative is unthinkable. The question of what happens if the Golden Throne fails completely has haunted the Imperium's leadership for centuries. The most optimistic projections suggest that the Emperor, freed from his physical prison, might undergo some form of transformation or resurrection. His perpetual nature, given the opportunity to function properly, could potentially allow him to be reborn, perhaps returning in some new form to lead humanity once more. Some radical factions within the Inquisition have even advocated allowing the throne to fail deliberately, gambling that the Emperor's resurrection would justify the temporary catastrophe of the Astronomican's collapse. These views remain deeply heretical and are suppressed with extreme prejudice whenever they surface. The risks are simply too great. If the Emperor's death proves permanent, if his soul is consumed by the warp or fragmented beyond recovery, then humanity loses not just the Astronomican, but also whatever psychic protection the Emperor provides against chaos. The Great Rift that split the galaxy after the fall of Cadia demonstrated what happens when the barriers between the materium and immaterium weaken. If Terra itself became the epicenter of such a breach, if the Emperor's death opened the webway portal he has spent 10,000 years keeping sealed, the demonic incursion could consume not just Terra but the entire Sol system and beyond. The Talisman of 7 Hammers, installed by Vulcan during the closing days of the Horus Heresy, represents the final safeguard against this worst-case scenario. This device functions as a dead man's switch, designed to activate should the Golden Throne fail. Its activation would result in the complete destruction of Terra, obliterating the Imperial Palace, the Throne World, and everything in the system in a cataclysm that would rival the destruction of Cadia. The logic behind such a measure is grimly practical. If Terra cannot be held, if the Emperor's death creates an uncontrollable breach into the warp, then better to destroy everything than allow chaos to claim humanity's birthworld and the Golden Throne itself. This failsafe ensures that even in death, even in ultimate defeat, Terra will never serve chaos. The symbolism is powerful and deeply characteristic of the Imperium's mentality. Rather than accept corruption or subjugation, the preferred option is total annihilation. The destruction of Terra would be catastrophic for the Imperium, removing both its spiritual and administrative center, but it would at least prevent the Chaos Gods from achieving a complete victory. Whether this constitutes a rational policy or merely the culmination of the Imperium's death cult mentality remains a matter of perspective. The Emperor's continued existence, viewed from outside the Imperial perspective, appears as a tragedy compounded by hubris and desperation. A being of immense power and vision, who united Terra and launched humanity toward dominance of the galaxy, now exists as little more than a psychic battery, his dreams of enlightenment replaced by the nightmare of the Imperium's theocratic authoritarianism. His children, the Primarchs, are dead, traitor, or lost. His grand design collapsed into ruin. The species he sought to elevate has become more superstitious and ignorant than at any point in its history. Everything he fought against, everything he sought to prevent has come to pass, and he remains conscious enough to witness it, trapped within the Golden Throne, unable to change anything, his power reduced to the basic functions of maintaining the Astronomican and holding back demons. Yet from within the Imperial perspective, the Emperor's sacrifice represents the ultimate expression of duty and dedication. He endures unimaginable torment for 10,000 years to protect humanity, never surrendering, never accepting defeat, maintaining his vigil despite the cost to himself. This interpretation makes him a truly divine figure, suffering for the salvation of his followers, bearing the weight of humanity's survival on his broken body. The Imperial Creed's emphasis on sacrifice and duty finds its ultimate justification in the Emperor's example. If he can endure 10 millennia of agony for humanity's sake, then surely any lesser sacrifice demanded of Imperial citizens pales in comparison. Both interpretations contain truth. The Emperor is simultaneously victim and savior, prisoner and protector, the greatest tragedy and the greatest hero of the Imperium. His existence defies simple categorization, incorporating too much suffering and too much significance to be dismissed as merely one or the other. This ambiguity, this coexistence of contradictory truths, characterizes much of Warhammer 40,000's setting, but nowhere is it more concentrated than in the figure of the Emperor trapped upon the Golden Throne. The brutal truth of keeping the Emperor alive is that there are no good options, only terrible necessities and impossible choices. The sacrifice of Psychers is monstrous, yet stopping would doom billions. The Emperor's suffering is incomprehensible, yet ending it might destroy everything he sacrificed to protect. The Golden Throne is failing, yet every attempt to repair it risks catastrophe. The Imperium has become everything the Emperor fought against, yet without his continued existence it would collapse immediately. These contradictions cannot be resolved, only endured, much like the Emperor endures within his prison of ancient technology and failing flesh. The system perpetuates itself through a combination of genuine necessity, institutional inertia, and the simple absence of alternatives. 10,000 years of precedent have made the current arrangement seem inevitable, the only possible response to the circumstances the Imperium faces. To question it is to question everything, to potentially destabilize the entire edifice of imperial authority and religious doctrine. So the questions are not asked, at least not openly. The black ships continue their harvests. The tech priests perform their rituals, the custodes maintain their vigil, and deep beneath the imperial palace, in the Sanctum Imperialis, the Emperor endures, his body slowly crumbling. His consciousness split between worlds, fighting battles that will never end, sustained by a machinery that grows less reliable with each passing year and powered by the daily consumption of 1,000 souls. This is the brutal truth. This is the price of survival in a galaxy that offers no mercy and accepts no excuses. The Emperor of mankind, the master of humanity, the God Emperor, exists in a state of torment that has lasted 10 millennia and shows no sign of ending. His subjects worship him as divine, never knowing that their God is as much a prisoner as they are, trapped in different cages perhaps, but equally unable to escape the roles that circumstance and necessity have imposed. The light of the Astronomicon burns bright across the void, guiding ships through the darkness, and that light is fueled by suffering beyond comprehension, by sacrifice measured in millions of lives, by the slow death of humanity's greatest champion, stretched across 10,000 years and counting. There is no escape from this horror, no solution that does not risk even greater catastrophe. The Imperium exists in a state of managed decay, buying time with lives, trading futures for presents, sacrificing everything in the desperate hope that somehow, eventually, something will change. The Emperor endures because he must endure, because the alternative is extinction, because 10,000 years of sacrifice cannot be for nothing. And so the Golden Throne continues its function, the Psykers continue to die, and the Imperium continues to exist, day by terrible day, paying the price that survival demands in a galaxy where mercy is weakness and compassion is heresy.